I'm not quite sure where I am anymore. When I walked into the room this morning and Charles was talking about Kessler, it was like 60 years ago. James Pratt, who is mentioned frequently here, was my business partner with Pratt Box Henderson, and I'm here because Pratt married my sister. And so I got involved and came down here, and one of the first things I discovered about James was that he had a mind for history, and I haven't heard anybody talk anything like Charles did this morning about what the history of Dallas is all about. And just as a homey aside, James's mother founded the Texas history section of the Dallas Public Library. And between the two of them, they kept everything. And you could never not go to them and find out what you wanted to do. And when you went out to the Farah Park for anything, but particularly the fair, you discovered that he'd been there in 1936, 9 years old, and knew the whole thing and could tell you about it. And it was one of the things that was particularly interesting to me. I came here after 5 years with Eero Saarinen, and Eero Saarinen didn't think in terms of urban design or anything. He just thought in terms of context. And you just did everything, and you looked at everything. Dan Kiley came out and talked to us 2 or 3 times a year. All of that was an attitude about how you do things. And that's what has been kind of wonderful today, to see that there are so many parts of Dallas. Gail and I were saying, where are those things Charles is talking about? Because not all of them are evident. But it's an exciting thing to see all of this. My grounding, and what I want to talk about today, is just being somebody who lives in Dallas and uses the trails and wants to make them better. When the Katy Trail came along, I had been involved in something called the Oaklawn Forum, in which we were developing a mixed-use ordinance for developing Uptown and Oaklawn, because Dallas had no history of mixed use. There were no duplexes in great amount of or districts. And I lived in an area just to the left of the green ribbon, and the trains were still there. I have 2 sons who today are 50 and 53. I would take them up on the railroad track. We would walk the railroad track up to a restaurant called Baby Doe's. And Baby Doe's had a donkey and a goat and a couple of other things to attract families to eat at the restaurant. And so we would pet the donkey and the goat, and then we'd turn around and walk home. And they were preschool age. So then in about 94, the train stopped running, and DART got a hold of this, and they wanted to run DART down this track. And a large number of people in the area convinced the city that that was wrong and that DART should be over on Central Expressway. And once that happened, then there was a tug of war between the city and the county of who would take ownership of the right-of-way, who would have the liability. The deal came that the city would take ownership and the county would provide the 20% match for the first grant that built 2.5 miles. So we all got together and we decided that we didn't need a plan, in the sense that we didn't need a master plan. All we needed to do was figure out what we wanted to do to build 3.5 miles. And we had a lot of people who understood this kind of concept. Half the people in this picture are people who were working on the trail. And we finally came together and we hired Chuck McDaniel and his group to actually design the trail, and went on from there to getting it going. And part of getting it going, of course, was being willing to raise about $10 million. Valletta Lil, who's going to be on the next panel, said she was in her first council term. She said, I'll get you 500,000 in the next bond issue if you will raise 500,000. We didn't know what we were doing, but we said yes. And so we managed to do that and get it. But one of the things that Stanley pointed out was, and that's what's really happening today, is we build our own cities, and we go to see other people's cities to see what other people have built for themselves. And I think my whole motivation is that the pleasure and satisfaction of building my city is what motivates me. I'm in my 60th year of building Dallas, and people were building Dallas before I got here, and they'll be building them soon after. This is the Snyder's Plaza, which I think is the best thing Chuck has done before he did Pacific Plaza. And so, and the tower over there, I married a native, and she lived in a house and her grandmother next door on the 2 lots that now have that building on them. And her grandfather had developed the area. And in her lifetime, she probably lived within 2 miles of that spot the whole time. And we were living close by, and we built the trail. And then in the spirit of this conference, it seemed the natural thing to do to expand the idea. The trail was done. I wasn't particularly interested in managing the trail. I like to build things. I like to think of myself as an implementer. And so the idea was we have a hub with the Katy Trail, which is literally in the center of Dallas County, and that we have trail plans that were 25 and 30 years old. I don't like new master plans. You know, I feel we've got enough master plans for the rest of our lives. And I wanted to take the master plans we had and figure out how we could build a loop of green that would be the trail infrastructure for the whole city. We've talked a lot today off and on about how we bring everybody together and how we unite people. And I think we all realize that the tipping in our culture of having more unity and more equality really depends on getting to know each other. I had one person say to me, well, maybe I don't want to go to that place the trail will take me to. And that made me think a lot about what I'm trying to do with my group of people. And it really comes down to, I see trails, we see trails as creating the opportunity for connection. And that part of what building a city needs to be, and what my 2 colleagues were talking about before me, is how you build a city that everybody can come together, enjoy it, have a better place to live. So this is what we decided to do. Willis Winters and I are old architect buddies, and so we got together and tried to figure out how we could do all of this in what is existing, that is right-of-ways. And we made that map, and then we made this map to show us that the red was what we had to build. How do we do that? We talked to Mayor Rollins at one point, just so he knew what we were doing, and he said, if you bring that whole thing to the city, you're dead. That it's too big, too large an idea to implement in a reasonable amount of time. Pick a piece. So the 7 of us who formed the Circuit Trail Conservancy picked this out as the loop. And the Circuit Trail Conservancy is a nonprofit. We became a Texas corporation, nonprofit corporation, at the request of the city, so that we would be the nonprofit partner with the city to build trails. This building that we're in is about 30 years old. It was my first experience with nonprofit partnerships. My firm was the consulting architect, and we managed the construction of this building. And in working with the city and understanding how city governments work, how they work with fixed budgets, fixed ideas, and all of that, I came to understand that if we used the layout that we did with the Katy Trail, which was essentially private-public partnership, that we could make great inroads to everything. One of the differences, well, this is the loop. The blue is there. The two pieces at the upper left there, which SWA are doing, are crossing I-35 and getting from the old Trinity Strand Trail over to the levee. The other two pieces, which half associates are doing, are a little piece down here, which is kind of inconsequential, but an 8.5 mile trail that is the first trail that's going to go through the Trinity Forest. And it means that it will be the ability of people to use the trail as well as the forest, as well as damage it. And we're quite worried about all of that. So this is our goal. And we think that in 3 years, if you come back, you can take a 50-mile bicycle ride and have a good time. So this is the first piece. When we started out, our idea was that Stemmons would not change and that we could go over it. Stemmons is I-35. We could go over it, and the height of going over it was something we could do with the bridge, with the ramps. Then they decided they had to rebuild it, and they wanted to have the ability to double deck it. So we shifted gears, and if you look over to the right there, there's a green strip. That green strip is this horizontal Highline Boulevard. So we came up with this design, and we can access the Katy Trail under Stemmons and Dart into Victory, and then you can connect with the Trinity Strand over here. We could do that both ways. So the map shows you that the curve at the top is the up and over. The straight line to the right is a future up and over that we think is possible, because one of the good things is that TxDOT is welcoming us as part of the design team. And we know that that has air rights where there are no electrical power lines, transmission lines, and we know that can happen. So then in the middle here where you see Oak Lawn, we have a bridge idea there so that we can actually go over Oak Lawn, the upper bridge. One of the things we've learned here is that time passes, and as we rebuild Dallas, we are increasing the density. And increasing the density, the purpose for alternative transportation becomes more and more a requirement, and that we need to find a way to realize that 5 days of the week, the car needs precedent, and 2 days of the week, recreation needs precedent, using the same trail. And we want to also deal with the fact that we're in transition. You can't necessarily build the things that work for the high density during the transition unless you've got a development group that are willing and understand the value of that. So when we get done, we could very possibly have a network of 2 levels of trail. And I think that's what would be ideal for the city. But if you go, that high-rise building to the right there is the first of 2 high-rise buildings. If you think of 10, 20 more of those and the people that will generate, there's also a great deal of housing. You can see big donuts of housing here, which are 4- and 5-story buildings. So the transition has already begun. And part of our challenge is to be sure we understand how to deal with that. The blue line is the Highline Trail I was just showing you. The red is the connection that can happen in the future to the Katy Trail. The Trinity Strand over here to the left is an existing trail, and the next trail that SWA is helping us with is the Trinity Gateway. And we feel that the other possibilities which involve a good deal of difficulty are less appropriate than this one. This is a difficult trail also because we are crossing Irving Boulevard, which is a 6-lane artery into downtown. The old Turtle Creek Meander here is really a park, and the idea is that we get over the street, and then we come into this block, and this whole block, all those buildings are one-story buildings. It really means that right now, the only trail that makes sense is the one at the bottom of the section. We're trying to inject a sense of what this project could really be if the development was all coordinated and the idea of an elevated trail was part of it, and that the cost of the elevated trail would be part of the redevelopment. The next piece is the Skyline. This is one of the pieces that Half Associates is helping us with. This piece has just kind of been left over because as people manipulate budgets, they decided they'd spend the money someplace else. So when we worked out the loop, it was dropped into our basket, and it's about a $2 million basket. And there's essentially a piece of concrete and a bridge over a creek. The bridge is the expensive part. All these trails in the river bottom are essentially Corps of Engineer maintenance roads that function quite well as trails in addition. What we haven't tried to do is deal with the issue of what we could do to enhance those that wouldn't upset the floods. The final piece is the Trinity Forest Trail that Half Associates is helping with us. And there are really 3 trails. The trail of the larger image is from the middle up, and we connect with White Rock Lake area, literally at the Santa Fe Trail. We come down through a golf course. All the yellow is public parkland. And we come down under I-30. There's ability to do that. Then we keep coming down, and down here in the lavender is a lake that is owned by Encore, which is our utility, transfer utility. And the key here is that if we are going to build a trail in a floodplain, how do you make it usable the maximum number of days? And part of that requirement is you raise the trail. That means you've got to mitigate the volume that takes the floodwater. And we have discovered that that lake possibly is the way to do that. If we don't do that, then we've got to dig up a lot of holes in the park down here at the bottom and the other yellow pieces of land to take care of that. There is a DART station down here at the bottom, and part of what we see as essential to whatever we do is to reach out and connect with any DART station that this big circle comes near. Because when the complete Dallas Integrated Trail Circuit is completed, it's 130 miles, we want people to be able to take DART one way or the other and ride back. We want as much variety and connection as we can think of. This is Half's suggestion for how we go under the railroad. I personally think it's designed for an era of trains carrying coal, but the whole idea is to protect everybody. I haven't quite figured out what besides coal is the real issue. This shows you what happens and how we're trying to deal with the floodwater. we are saying that we want our trail to function except when it gets to a flood that will happen every 5 years. And that generally the flooding will come up to the edge of the retaining wall here, but you'll still be able to go on the trail. It needs to be recessed below the flood level so that the distance between the flat surface of the trail and the underside of the bridge allow an emergency vehicle to come through. It's essential that we have safe trails and that any accidents and maintenance can function. If the water rises and this fills with water, when it goes down, it will self-flush. We've talked a lot about Farah Park today. The green line, the Santa Fe line, is there. You can go from White Rock Lake into downtown, and you can go from downtown over to Victory and into the trails that I talked about earlier. The trail that we're building is over at the right, and the blue line is an existing railroad right-of-way that serviced Farah Park and now services one of the areas above the blue line. But it's very low traffic that has to do with intermittent delivery and pickup. And at the moment, we think that there's no problem of, well, I've gone ahead. Anyway, there's no problem of coming together and using it, so that in the future, if the siding function no longer is useful, then we will have a possession of the right-of-way for the trail. So the last piece is from the middle of this drawing down to the bottom. It's the piece that goes through the Trinity Forest. In the middle, you will see a lot of land, little lots. This area was originally an African-American residential area called Roosevelt Heights. This is a good example of how urbanization and paving increased the flooding and therefore flooded this area on a regular basis. And at some point, the city decided that the best way to deal with it was to buy out all the landowners. In the middle, just between the two roads, is actually a park called Roosevelt Park. And it's our analysis of the whole situation that Roosevelt Heights could become a new park that was actually the entrance to the greater Trinity Forest, and the access is excellent. And at the top of the watershed is our arboretum, and at the bottom is the the bird one. And so that if we had these three parks in this same watershed, and we had our trail, which is mainly the main highway, and that off of that trail were side roads that were controlled by people who were taking care of big trees and springs and all the rest of it, we would have come up with a pretty good solution. So I see us at a place where we've got a fixed land area, we've got this fantastic watershed, we've got a lot of people who are doing things, but we're not very well coordinated. And we don't really understand what our total resources might be. But we're anxious to build a terrific environment. So if we could do all of that, we would really have something. And I think the energy in this room shows you that there is a great commitment in Dallas to do this. And there's a lot of opportunity for those of us who want to do it to do a very good job and do a better job. Thank you.